Okay, I think we'll start now and people can still trickle in. My name is Erica. I'm the program manager at the Armenian Institute. Um, Thank you to all of you who are joining us this evening for this Armenian Institute online event titled Golden Age, Exploring 10 Years of Queer Armenian Writing. I'm only assuming that people have been joining us from all over the world, not just London and the UK, where the Institute is based. So welcome. We have organized this event tonight in partnership with the Queer Armenian Library and Oxford University's Pembroke College. And this coincides with Pride Month. So with me tonight are John, Parker, and Miriam. So John is the founder of the Queer Armenian Library, which is, the world's first and only digital library devoted to literary works by, about, and for queer Armenians. John was a 2022 Lambda Literary Fellow, and his essays have been featured in a number of anthologies. He is a GLAAD Media Award nominee for his acclaimed podcast, entitled The Square Book Saved My Life. He is a member of the Podcast Academy and hosts also the Gaily Show, the only daily LGBTQ news and talk radio show in the United States. So Oxford University's Bodleian Library purchased the books presented online in the Queer Armenian Library, and has created basically the first and only physical version of the library last year, in 2024. This is why we also have here with us tonight Miriam, who is the director of the Oxford Network for Armenian Genocide Research and CDF Fellow in Women's, Gender and Queer Histories at the Faculty of History at Oxford University. She developed a research interest in the notion of silence from the work she's done on the Armenian genocide. And the Network for Armenian Genocide Research is running a series on creative storytelling and oral history for students and staff at Oxford. And the goal of this series is to raise awareness for the importance of oral history and survivor testimonies as educational tools. This particularly resonates with us at the Armenian Institute, since, as some of you may know, we are currently undertaking a special project around oral history called Heritage of Displacement, which, I encourage you all to discover on our website if you're interested. But this is not what we're talking about tonight. So both of you are also, as I understand it, affiliated and deeply connected with YALA, the International Armenian Literary Alliance. So you may or may not tell us something about that later. So tonight, what we're going to do is we will first hear from John to learn more about queer Armenian writing, books, literature, a movement maybe or not. And, when preparing this event, we thought a lot about this notion of golden age and what it means. And I believe John will tell you something about those reflections later. Then after this, Miriam will give us, I think, some context around the Bodleian Library's acquisition of this collection, how it happened, why, what does it mean, where's that going? So we are hoping with this event to open up questions and debate afterwards, if you want to, where you in the audience will be able to ask questions either via the chat or directly and speak to us as you wish. So yes, please prepare your questions. I will now open the floor to John.
Thank you very much. I am Shuno Hakaltun. I'm very happy to be with all of you here again. I know a few years ago, the Armenian Institute was very gracious in having me come here and talk about the founding of the library, as it was just getting started then. And I'm very pleased to be back here because we're at a very unique moment in the library's history where it's starting to take on a life of its own. And so I'm not going to talk too much about the all of what I already talked about a couple of years ago because I'm very interested to share with all of you this new life that the library is beginning to have, which is more unattached from me, which is really fantastic because I think that that is also emblematic of the theme of what we're talking about tonight, which is also the golden age, right? What does golden age mean? And I think there are some arguments to be made that we are seeing that happening right now. And I know that sounds academic-y, and I'm going to try not to be academic-y about it because I actually have a public policy background. I'm not a literary MFA candidate or with a degree, but I will say that the collection has grown to 97 entries in the library, and that doesn't include readings, panels, podcasts that were interviews with queer Armenian writers and organizations that are also featured in there because there are a number of organizations that are either serve queer Armenians or they are literary, but I wasn't focusing on specific work. I just wanted folks to know about those organizations and the work that they do. The library continues to have just a huge variety of different memoir and nonfiction and fiction and speculative fiction and comedians, both in terms of we've got, comedians doing their sets. And then we also have a UK-based comedian who just released her first memoir earlier this year. There are short films in there, and there are feature-length films in there. There's just a really wide variety of materials, which is very exciting to see that we're now up to 97 titles. I do want to mention, if you see that shelf right there, where my finger is pointing to, that up until last year was the only physical collection of the Queer Armenian Library, which is why I'm very happy that Meryem is here because she has really created space, literal space in the world for the library, both in the UK and somewhere unexpected. I'll let Meryem share that with you when she starts talking. But I specifically started with wanting to have a virtual resource because for a lot of folks who are here, being queer and Armenian is being a diaspora within a diaspora. And so for myself, I had never met anyone who was both identifying as somewhere within the queer rainbow and also Armenian within the huge, vast worldwide diaspora of Armenians. I didn't meet anyone until I was in my 30s. And for a long time, and even still today, the two did not go together. They did not go hand in hand. And so when I finally found myself meeting another queer Armenian and getting to know just a little bit about them, I was like, there has to be someone else who's written about this. There has to be. There has to be an op-ed somewhere. There has to be an essay. There has to be, a chapter and an anthology. And it started, that question launched a 4-year search, and which then led to the publication in November of 2020 of the library. And I was just I wasn't literally there, but virtually there was a queer bibliography conference a couple years ago, or a couple weeks ago rather, in the UK. And they were, as bibliographers, asking me very specifically about how and why I chose to format each individual page the way that I did. And I thought it'd be very lovely to kind of revisit that as a prelude into the conversation that we're going to have today about golden age. And so something that I was very specific about wanting to do from the beginning was putting dates of publication and where that fit within the larger genre. If we're going to be talking about a golden age, well, then you have to have a mass, right, of publications. And I think that's something that we're finally seeing over the past 10 years is a large number, a quantity of works. For example, the first studio photographer, Mariam Shahinyan, was in the early 20th century, considered the first female studio photographer in the Ottoman Empire, and very queer photography. And you can see samples of that in the library. then you have the films of Sergei Parajanov in the 70s. You don't see the first memoir by a person identifying as Armenian American and lesbian until 1992. And then you don't see the next memoir isn't written until 2008 by Nancy Agabian, who I see in the participant list here today. And then from there, you don't see any memoirs by the first memoir by Trans Man, 2016, Gay Armenian, Trans Armenian, and Gay Armenian 2020, right? So you have these huge gaps in time between these publications, and a theme that comes up over and over again is the idea of being alone, that these writers are writing in solitude. They don't realize that there are even other titles or writers to whom they could read to inform their own work. And now we're seeing that change over the past few years, which I think is also going to be important when we're talking about the idea of golden age. How are writers engaging with each other in community to develop new works that we can look at, right? So that was something I wanted to do from the beginning of is to situate where does a work fit within the larger timeline of queer Armenian literature. Obviously, I don't, I'm in the U.S. My Armenian family is in France, so in the Western world, we put a lot of emphasis on firsts. How amazing is it to be the first? I would love for we get to a point with this library where we're celebrating the 70th of a particular genre. But so I'm not saying the first in terms of wanting to celebrate as the first person who crossed the finish line or got there as if they were the most original person. But I think it's important to note firsts and seconds because there is this idea of feeling alone and feeling in solitude. And so when you start to see these folks, the first person to do this or the second person to do this, you begin to see yourself embodied in time. And for Armenian culture, we understand our history. We can get people that can quote things that happened 5,000 years ago, right? Or or 3,000 years ago, or so you get the idea. We're very embedded in history, but queer people are not found in that historical timeline. That's very suppressed and erased. When we look at the work of Vaha Tekenyan, right, that's a prime example where folks know, generally speaking, that he was gay, but there's very little actual documentation because so much of it was suppressed. Yegishe Charents, another poet who died in the Stalinist purges. I mean, his papers were hidden for decades before they were found to confirm that yes, he was queer. And so I also wanted to include the idea of first and second and dates to begin to create a historical timeline. We fit in history. We are not the first ones to do this work. Obviously, I wanted to include author bios. I wanted folks to like, who is this person? Where did they come from? Where are they writing? Who are they in this world? Because I think that there is something, I wanted to include that biographical information on a page as someone who was by himself to go, hey, here's this person living in New York. Here's this person writing in the UK. Here's this person in Glendale. Here's this person in Yerevan. Here's their life experience. That's kind of similar to mine. They're dealing with the same questions. When I read Lion's Woman Legacy by Taleen Voskuni, a memoir in 1992 by a woman not from my generation and lesbian. I'm queer. There was so much about, you think, well, how much experience can there be? There was actually a lot of the questions that she was asking in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I was like, I am still asking those questions. That is exactly what I want to hear someone talking about and reading about. And I want to hear how you, Arlene, were navigating that and the answers that you found, because a lot of the answers she found were very important to me, even here in the 21st century, of navigating how am I going to move in this world and live in this world and love in this world. So that to me was why I wanted to include author biographical information in there. Obviously, snippets, excerpts from the work, very important to give folks a flavor of what's in those various titles. And then at the end, I wanted to, because it's so hard to find some of these titles. So I was very clear about wanting to include ISBN numbers, so that folks can be very clear, I am looking for this specific title when they're doing searches. I mean, this search, when I say for 4 years, it was on every search engine that I could find and get my hold of. I mean, Google, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Thrift Books, Abe Books, bookstores like Armenian bookstores, Abril Books in Los Angeles, Saraban Books in Los Angeles, anywhere where I could find blogs, where I could put words in. And I will say that this is not, when you go to the library, it's still, even now in 2025, having been founded in 2020, I can't say that it is that it's got everything in there. A novel just came out earlier this year, where in the description and in the titles, they're not making note of even using the keyword Armenian, even though the main character is. So when you're searching for something, you know this because of their last name. But if you do all the keyword searches, gay and Armenian, LGBT and Armenian, that book won't show up, which is really frustrating even now today in 2025. So much of what you're seeing in there may be other works that are out there that I don't know about. And so I'm also saying that there's a contact form on the website. I will admit the contact form, there were some bugs in it. There were messages that didn't get to me that should have. So if you've used the contact form before and you're like, I sent something and he never responded, there was a reason for that. I've now gone through all of them. It does work correctly. So I want to acknowledge I didn't have it set up right. It's working now. But we need that, because I still have folks that are reaching out to me and going, hey, do you know about this? Hey, do you know about that? And I'm like, nope, didn't know about that. Let's get it into the library. So that's been the virtual process. I wanted to be virtual. I'm sorry, that was what's on the pages and why the pages are the way that they are. When I first went to Abril Books, there were some titles, but not all of them. And I will say it does make me a little teary-eyed now when I go to Abril Books. They made an actual page. When you go there now, you can click on LGBTQ books and you can find a whole page of titles that they now carry at the bookstore. I don't want to take credit for that. I don't want to mean that by any means, but I think it's very special that is there now. And at the end of every page, I just ask folks to go to April Bookstore and see if you can order the books through them, if you're able to do that, and if they're able to order them or they already have them on file, because I think it's very important to support Armenian bookstores right now. It is virtual. It is not attached. I get questions about this. Last year at the Queer Archive Conference at Oxford, and again this year, I was asked, why is it independent? Why is it not attached to an organization? That's my own trust issues. First, it was I didn't want to get bogged down in waiting for other people. I didn't want to have to deal with the bureaucracy of other folks. I'm like, I am a very independent person. I just want to get something up. I have a vision for something. I want to get it and I want to go. And what you see in the library is actually the fourth iteration, the fourth design of the library that I came up with. I do worry now, though, with my trust issues of if I hand it off to an organization, what will they do with it? Will it still be a priority with them? Will they stop updating it altogether? Like, will they continue to devote resources to it? Will they stop paying for it and then it goes, offline? So long as I'm alive, I will pay for the domain registration and make sure that it is there and it's available on the web. And that's something I know I can guarantee. That's why it's independent. But, and this is where I'm going to sort of conclude my remarks and hand it off to Meryem, is that through the International Armenian Literary Alliance, we were connected, Meryem and I, and it is now taking on a life of its own, separate, not only just from me, but it's having a physical presence in the world. And so you can go to Oxford University now, and you can go to Pembroke College, and you can go to the Bodleian Library, which is the oldest library in the world, and you can find queer Armenian books. And it's just really special to me through the efforts of Meryem that the world's oldest library now has literature from one of the world's oldest people. And I know that queer Armenians go back thousands of years, and I want to honor and acknowledge that, even though we can't read their work. I know that they were there, and it's just very special to me that we have had this time together to create this. And Meryem, I'm going to turn it over to you now, if it's all right, where you can talk about your work with the library and manifesting it into physical reality.
Yeah, thank you. This was really lovely. Can you hear me all right? Okay, great. Well, it's a real pleasure to be back at the Armenian Institute again. It's very hot in Oxford, so you see a much more better picture of me actually on on screen now. I wanted to start with like a personal story, just to also show how I kind of slipped into queer Armenian literature, and I think that says something about what history is and what historical research does. It forces you kind of to take on, your own curiosity and brings you into really unexpected places and brings you face to face with very unintentional encounters, I would say. So I was doing a wonderful, wonderful oral history project with Columbia University, also financed by Oxford University. And I had the 128 survivor accounts, many of them, of course, women, as we know. Women were, mainly the survivors during the genocide. And I was really, really interested in the private stories of those women. They were mostly interviewed by men. And even when they were interviewed by women, they didn't really talk about for example, their experiences of being sexually enslaved, bearing children of perpetrators, etc., even though actually a great number in that collection had that experience. And I was talking at Columbia University a little bit about that in the oral history seminar, and a student said to me, why don't you go to the Brooklyn Women's Archive? There's a women's archive, and women from all over the world have contributed to this archive, especially women who felt that they're unseen in their communities. So I made my way into Brooklyn, and the archive is called Her Story Lesbian Archive. So Her Story and Lesbian Archive. It was established 1972. I rocked up there in 2019, and I asked the really lovely, lovely archivist who has been there from the beginning. I said, "Do you have anything by Armenian woman?" And she said, "I have two things actually. So one thing is a letter by an Armenian woman, a coming out letter, and the other one is a CD by a lesbian Armenian punk band. Which ones do you want to see?" And I said, "Give me the letter first." And the letter was written in the 1980s, early 1980s. It's one-page letter, and it actually connects to what John was just talking about. It was written by Taleen Voskuni, that you had just mentioned her. She wrote this memoir called Lion's Legacy in 1992. It was published. So the letter was sent a decade before she published this memoir. And in that letter, she basically addresses the archive and says, "Dear archive, you're my only beholder of my truth because I can't really live my truth. I'm an other in a community that is already otherized." So she's playing a little bit on that word oda, so other in Armenian. And she says basically what John was just talking about, being in diaspora, in a diaspora community. And she says at the end of the letter, she signs off and she's like, "I already feel better because I feel like maybe I'm never going to meet any of you in this archive, but I just wanted to be part of a community." And I found, and then of course I found that the second item was that CD by the punk band, which is just incredible. It's just really, really beautiful music. And it was a really nice experience in that archive because there were a bunch of Korean, very young Korean women there. I mean, barely legal age. I think they were between 16 and 18. And they were there giggling in this archive, looking up things, whether, there are some Korean items and things like that, because they also wanted to be part of a community. And they wanted to have, like, at least feel once in their life, maybe, or the first time in their life, that they're welcome somewhere. So I think for me, this is kind of my way into Queer Armenian Library. And I think one of the things that I want to say, what kind of is the foundation of the work that we have been doing together with John, is what's at stake here with this type of work and these kind of conversations that we want to have with you tonight and with other communities elsewhere is we want to have a conversation, or what's at stake is love, right? I mean, we are talking, this is a love story. This is a way to read how love is lived as a lived experience, not as a societal expectation. And love is like silence, is a really big word in my work, and I think it's the mightiest of all words. So I think if there's one thing that I want anybody to think about when they pick up a Queer Armenian book, or for example, an Arab Queer Armenian book, or any book, always think and read of it as a love story. So this is a kind of my introduction. Then, of course, many years later, I met John, and I thought, wow, this is a really wonderful, wonderful project. And I had done, before I heard about the Queer Armenian Library, I had done a really, really big project at Oxford University. I created a pop-up library within the library, within Bodleian Library, which is publicly accessible. And I created this library around the Syrian war, which is the region that I'm working on. So Eastern Mediterranean is my historical expertise. And we invited authors from Syria and those in exile. We invited them to come to Oxford. And for 3 months, Oxford became kind of the Syrian capital, of literature. It was really, really, everybody was coming together. We had Sufis dancing, we had people coming. We had a really dear, dear friend of mine who came, and it was his last visit to England, because then a year later he was killed just before Assad fell, which was really sad, because his name is Khalid Khalifa, and he wrote books, very critical books about the war and the revolution. It was wonderful to be able to kind of read him here together with him. And read him in front of an audience. And I think that was for him really, I mean, I'm mentioning this and I'm coming to a broader point. I'm mentioning this not only to, also make us remember those who have written those love stories that actually ultimately took them away from us. But what was really important for Khalid, I remember, he said, I have not read in front of a Syrian audience since the war has started. And I think this is a really big point that kind of really, again, underfeeds my work with the Queer Armenian Library, is that I want to create an audience because I think we need to read these stories aloud, and I think we need to read to one another. And I think reading is a really wonderful way of connecting with each other. So I had created this Syrian pop-up library, and the pop-up library stayed there, so the shelf stayed there. And we were thinking about what to do next, because the Syrian pop-up library was really, really successful. It had 20,000 visitors. And then we got in touch with, we were put in touch with John and decided that we are going to do the Queer Armenian Library. And one of the things that I said from the very beginning is that, well, we need to find institutional funding, because I really want the university to, as brash as it sounds, but I really wanted the university to pay for it. Because I think there's a lot of conversations around equality, diversity, inclusion, etc. at this EDI, kind of catchword. But then there's no real investment in it. So I applied, and I think we applied 3 times, but it was really, really important for me to get at least 30% of the project's money from the university, and have the assurance that whatever books we're bringing to Oxford or buying for Oxford, they will be also mirrored back in our library. So not only did we wanted to have the university invest in this and show, true kind of integrity, but we also wanted to kind of make our way into the library catalog and diversify the catalog, like I had done with Syrian Silence. So all the books of Syrian Silence are also in the Bodleian Library. and Queer Armenian books are also in the Bodleian Library. So I think that was a very conscious move that not only I did, but also, of course, supported by our wonderful, wonderful head of the Armenian Studies team, Professor Theo van Lint, who has been very, very influential in pushing this through. So yeah, here you see on the screen, you see that pop-up library that we created. Currently, I have to say, we are not represented there, but that's also good. Currently, there's another community group that is displaying books on neurodivergency. So that a one-time idea of creating a pop-up library now became a true community space. And I think that's really beautiful as well, because it means if we are sharing spaces, we are also connecting communities. So in a way, I feel like everyone who is in this library, starting from the Syrian books to the Armenian books to the books about neurodivergency, then we had a book collection there for 3 months in that pop-up library for blind people. And so it's a really, really beautiful space that kind of is now pollinating itself, but lives from that legacy of the Queer Armenian Library and the Syrian pop-up library. So because there are many, many people seeing these books, we got some requests, and John already talked about it, that the Queer Armenian Library now lives in like a little suitcase and can be sent anywhere in the world. And we have just sent her, the library, to Newcastle, where the library was used and read by the conference attendees. And in April, I took the Queer Armenian Library in my suitcase to a country that I don't want to mention right now because I don't want to endanger the queer community there. But I can say that I took the library also to Istanbul and presented it to the Randing Foundation. And I can talk a little bit more about the Randing Foundation if you like. And at the moment, again, I'm trying to apply for funding from the university to be able to bring the library over to Turkey and have the Queer Armenian Library there in Turkey to give workshops and also kind of give the Armenian communities there and especially the queer identifying communities there a way to be seen in those books and have conversations with those authors. As John said, I think that's really important. And in my last visit, and I think we have a picture here, I donated that one iteration of the Queer Armenian Library to a community bookstore, a queer bookstore in Istanbul. And the books that you're seeing here on the table, it's quite sweet because behind the table there's a little painting, and one of the things that the painting says is friend. And I think it's just brilliant that the books are kind of in front of that painting, that friendship painting. And so these books, they remained in Frankenstein bookstore just as kind of like a seeing piece, exhibition piece. And then a month later, we agreed that they were distributed to people. So people from the queer communities were able to just take a book for free because book buying is very, very expensive in Turkey. And that brings me to my last point about our collaboration with the Bodleian team, who also bought the entire Queer Armenian Library for us, and especially also for our students, which I think is really important. But this Bodleian team is so amazing, and I want to especially call out Lydia and Nico, because now they are helping actually Turkish bookstores and bookstores somewhere else in the Middle East to find books, because sometimes, as John was saying, it's very difficult to get the books, and it's good to buy them from April, but if you're a bookstore or if you're an institution, you have to do it, via, this is maybe a bit of a boring bit, but it has an important point, via official suppliers. And now, because the Bodleian has ordered all of these books, they also have the addresses of the suppliers, which we now can share with bookstores and institutions and university libraries in Turkey and in the Middle East, if they wanted to wanted to, order the books. And the team also said that they would help them, make those connections. So I feel like it's not just a library. It is also, I think, a lot about, sharing of knowledge, sharing of friendship, underlying what is really important. As I said, I think for me, it's a love story. And I think it is present in all of these kind of iterations that we have so far done. And just for the audience here, or if you watch it later on YouTube, if you like to have the Queer Armenian Library sent to you, we can send it to you if you send it back to us again, and we can help you with kind of public engagement activities around the library, which John has prepared for us. And of course, we really hope that the Armenian Institute might also do a little pop-up library because you're so much closer. I could just bring the library via train. But yeah, so it's let's have this project grow and make it even more meaningful than it is already. Yes.
Can I also mention, I mean, first of all, Meryem, thank you. Thank you for all of this. When you see that photo of the display in the Bodleian library on the yellow shelf there, and last year when I walked in, I was excited, and then when I walked in the door, my eyes just started, like, I started crying, and then I had to do a talk, and at the beginning of the first talk, I was like, oh my gosh, you guys don't understand what this means. And then the second day, I made it all the way through. I'm like, yes, I'm going to get all the way through this and not cry. And I cried by the end of it. And even 2 weeks ago, when I was at the talking virtually through the Queer Bibliography Conference, I halfway through just started crying all over again, because it's so amazing to see this out in the world. I had only ever seen it here. And you see random books. Sometimes I go to a bookstore, and I've gone into Gaze the Word in London, in a bookstore in Marquette, Michigan, and oh my gosh, I'll find a queer Armenian book. But to see the collection in person has a profound, at least it did for me, new feeling of reality. And there's just something about seeing it in person in a space that's not my own, and not necessarily in a traditional Armenian space, that just was very moving and meaningful. And so thank you for that work. It's really special also that it can be mobile and people can literally order it for their events or for a conference. It's very special. I also need to mention YALA, so the International Armenian Literary Alliance. So the library launched in November of 2020. By June of 2021, they had actually organized the first ever global reading of queer Armenian writers. And they also organized the first panel of queer Armenian writers. And then since then have continued to create panels, including like publishers and of speculative fiction. And next July, and not next month, having the first writing workshop with the theme of oh shoot. Hofsep, help me in the chat. I thought I was the only one, or I thought I was the first, is the prompt that for this writing workshop for queer Armenian writers to attend and to be in community and to write together on a global basis. This hasn't happened before. And so I think it's just very special that we have Meryem in the UK manifesting this and creating this as a physical presence, both in the UK and now in Turkey, which I never thought I was going to ever cross those borders. So, Meryem, thank you for that initiative, and to Yala as well. Thank you for, using your virtual platform to create a global space for writers and readers to come together. I mean, it's very special to see how other organizations have seen this library and made it their own and are running with it and incorporating it into their platforms. And I think that that's something that's very special and very necessary for the next phase of queer Armenian literature.
And I think one of the things that I can kind of hear from like audience feedback is, and we talked a little bit about that with you, John, as well, is the idea of joy, I think, in some of these just to draw out some of the things that really kind of resonate with these books in younger generations. I teach students from, age 18 upward. And I think that's something. It sounds so banal, but we talked about it. The covers are really, really joyful, and when we first talked about it, I was like, oh, such a minor point. But then when I did, kind of a public engagement thing with, with Oxfordshire, high school students, and they were like, "Oh my God, the covers! This is so amazing, and it's so joyful." And then we got to talk about that. Prompted us then to talk about what is queer joy. When are you joyful? Why is this making you so joyful? Why are you feeling so alive? So I think the idea. So I think in the genre of queer literature at the moment, I think, and I've talked a little bit about that with my Oxford colleagues too, because it's really, for me, that the covers are so important, and the color is so important. It's something very interesting and very new to consider. And yeah, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, John.
That could be a talk in its own right, because as I've learned over the past few years, authors don't necessarily get to have any say in the design of their covers. And so it may be that, it's not queer Armenians who are designing these covers, but these covers are gorgeous. When I think of Michael I should pull some off of the shelf here.
Michael, but I have him too.
When I think of Michael Barakiva's One Man Guy, and it's electric yellow, it's so special. I'm thinking of Taleen Voskuni's Sorry Bro, the cover to that one. That one is very special. Nancy Agabian's The Fear of Large and Small Nations. That's also a very striking cover. Sorry, it could be a talk all on its own. But I think that is, you're right, Meryem. When you see them in person all together like that, it creates also a visual representation, not just a literary representation, a visual representation of our experiences. And I think we've really lucked out. I don't know how the authors feel about their individual covers, but from my perspective, when you see them collectively like that, it is a really special representation, and I would say authentic representation, of all the various experiences that we see there. It'd be great. Natalie Cruz, who's trying to create an art wing, she is a art historian, and she focuses specifically on queer Armenian artists, and she's going to try to create an art wing for the library. She would be great to give a full analysis of all the covers and how it relates to both art and literature. But I know we want to get to
there's also something, I think there's something about like just kind of returning back to the title of today's evening, about the golden age. And I think we can start, it's too early to do that, but we can start planting the seeds of how does Queer Armenian Library, queer Armenian literature, or also I have to underline, I have shown that cover of the Queer Arab glossary, which is also quite joyful. And there is, I had also the discussion with some Syrian queer authors about the location of joy within community making and all of that, and how that then maybe, if you're talking about golden age, we're also talking about the ability to be copied, right? So it's the notion of golden age, of course, comes from from ancient Greece. All these wonderful statues, and then casts were made, and I'm just sitting behind the Ashmolean Museum, where it's the largest and oldest cast gallery. Apparently, everything oldest is here in Oxford, but so I just wanted to kind of bring us back to this idea of golden age and the ability ability to be copied or be copy worthy, and what you're thinking about that, and how maybe queer Armenian literature and maybe also literature that comes out of the Eastern Mediterranean might have its kind of effects on the overall genre.
Mhm. So I do have notes that I think could be good prompts for a conversation about Golden Age.
Yeah.
I think it's very grandiose to talk about, hey, there's a Golden Age happening, but what exactly does that mean? You know, I think when we talk about Golden Age in anything, whether it's literature or art, we sometimes think of, oh, this is the exemplars, this is the most exemplary, this is the best period of the literature. Well, when it comes to queer Armenian literature, it's only very recently that we've even understood it to be a genre, that there are enough works to constitute a subgenre of Armenian literature and a subgenre of queer literature that can be called, you know, queer Armenian literature. So on that regard, I'm like, are we there yet to a golden age? On that regard, I would say maybe not. But if we're thinking of it as a flourishing, then absolutely. I think that we're seeing a golden age happening right now in terms of not only are there more and more works coming out right now, but they're also starting to be aware of each other. I don't want to make the library the most, say that the library is the catalyst for this. But as an example, there was a writer who looked at the library and was like, what do you mean there hasn't been a novel with a trans Armenian woman as the hero? I will write that novel. And 2 years later, it was there, So there is this idea of, I'm hoping that there's more of this realization that that writers are no longer thinking of themselves, oh, well, there is nobody else. I'm by myself. I'm just going to write this novel because it's important to me. And these are the questions I'm asking. And as a writer, here's how I'm going to answer them in YA fiction or memoir or, autobiography, poetry, etc. That there's now this understanding that there is this collection of work and I can be in conversation with it. I think we've never had that before. And I think that would be an interesting point of looking at Golden Age, is because it's having conversations with each other. But the thing for me that I think will be why I would name this as a Golden Age is that this is the period that scholars and other writers will look back to and analyze as, why did it happen now? Why did all of these books happen now? What happened within why didn't it happen in the 1990s? Why didn't it happen in the 1960s? Why didn't it happen in the 2010s or the early 2000s? Now we're seeing in the late 20-teens and 2020s, this proliferation, this flourishing of work. We can have an author like Taleen Voskuni have a 3-book contract, and writing queer Armenian romance, rom-coms. That had never happened before. And here she gets this contract for 3.
Fantasy,
I mean, one every other year. It's amazing. Michael Barakiva has 3 YA novels. Why did that, lead to that? And then, why are other books taking 10 years still that we know that they've been working on them? And then suddenly, all of a sudden, right in this period, there seems to be that it's getting the go-ahead to being published. So I think that phenomenon will be what's happening right now. Is it technology? Is it cultural? Is it politics? Is it what's happening currently with the wars in the Republic? Is there something there that's causing a ripple effect out into the diaspora? I think that there's something happening right now in the flourishing of this literature that will cause scholars to look back and want to analyze this period. And writers, essayists, fiction writers, want to look back at this period right now and write about, why is it happening right now? And to me, I think that would be the idea of Golden Age. But, Meryem, I would turn it over to you. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think what you said about the body of work, that there is a substantial body of work, and definitely something that can is large enough to draw comparison. I think what you were talking about, like academics working on it, so it's not just a literary analyst, but it's you can look at it as a kind of yeah, in kind of in a wide angle perspective. But I think one of the things that we also need to kind of think about, or this is how I probably would approach that question, why now? Which is always a difficult question, I think. And it's, I mean, not a question with answers, but a question with maybe more questions or just prompts. And I have learned a lot through my students. I mean, I started here in 2018. Now it's 2025. I have to say, in the first 2 years, we didn't have conversations about gender. I didn't even think about gender, and I identify as a woman and gender historian. So I think about gender in my work, but I hadn't thought about gender as a question, which sounds again really easy, but that's just the reality. It wasn't a question for me. And then suddenly I had students who rocked up and changed gender throughout our years together, and saying, "Oh, could you now refer to me as they, them," and things like that. And these were prompt stumble blocks for me to think about, oh wow, there's something happening here now in terms of culture, as you said, but also what does it mean for the wider kind of society? And I think one of the words that we use a lot now, and that really makes sense, is kind of this idea of a reordering of kinship structure, right? And where do I feel home? Where do I feel safe? And where do I feel loved? And those are the questions that I mean, full credit, and that's why, you know, I've just been very transparent. Full credit to the new generations of students and young people who ask these difficult questions that we were maybe too lazy to ask publicly, or even ask ourselves
Or couldn't.
in my case. And so I mean, I get, you know, you get weepy when you see the library. I get weepy when I think about my students and about the difficult and complex questions that they take on, and say, what is family? What is kinship? What is community? What means joy? What means love? You know, and these are kind of questions in a broader sense. You know, they all connect us back to what does it mean to be truly, truly human? And somehow I think in my laziness of thought, I just assumed human is this. But, you know, with these new questions, I think I have learned a lot. And I think now connecting it back to the golden age and what you were just bringing up, I think we will look back at this as a golden age because there were young people brave enough to ask these questions publicly. Of course, these, you know, there are through lines into, you know, movements earlier into the century. I don't want to take away the work that was done by my father and by my mother and by a lot of fathers and mothers and uncles and aunties from me. But I think the new generation, how outspoken they are, it's quite extraordinary. And I think we should really just embrace them for their courage.
Nancy made a really great point in the chat of perhaps because of Queer Armenian liberation, we have 3 or 4 generations of queer Armenians out and active now, and they need books. You know, Meryem, you're talking about a new generation. Something I've noticed with the library, it's not just a single generation that's publishing and writing right now. It's writers from multiple generations that are getting out there. So Nancy, I thank you for naming that, because I think, Meryem, you're right that there is something very innovative happening right now. And I personally hold the belief on queer literature, YA is, to me, when young adult, is the most revolutionary. I think it is absolutely, of all the genres right now, I think that's the most exciting one, but that's just my own personal opinion. But when you look at the works that have been published over the past few years, it's from boomers, it's from Xers, it's from millennials, it's from Gen Z. They're all getting opportunities to publish, or they're fighting their way through and getting the publication opportunities. But what is that? That to me is that sort of golden age notion that we'll have to tease out over the next, you know, now and over the next few years. But I think that is also something, because it's happening now. Didn't happen in the 80s.
I didn't mean to say that. I mean, I'm really aware that you know, that we have now different generations kind of writing and talking about it, like myself. But I think that bit of kind of prompting us and making it into a public issue. I really do want to hold space, at least for my students, of making us and asking these kind of things, prompting us to do better, and then inspiring us. Now here you go, I'm at a panel about queer Armenian literature, who would have thought that in 2019 when I didn't really think about gender, and so I think that's really, and Nancy, absolutely right, and calling us in and saying that there are many, many generations of people writing now, and before, of course.
Yeah, and so thank you so much to both of you for talking and having this conversation for us and with us. I'm just checking the chat. Thank you. Yes, those are thank yous, which we'll keep. So I think a lot has been said about golden age, amongst other things. The idea of a massive and a quantity of works being put together, the engagement with each other's work, to be informed and also to bounce against each other. And there is also, I think, the notion that something is valued and is positively connoted, something that is highly regarded by peers, but also non-peers and available for people to look back onto. On a kind of a twist, I hope and wish that it's not going to be a golden age, because a golden age is something that we look back onto with fondness because it has disappeared. So I truly, truly hope that it's something that's here to stay.
We could also have a renaissance, though.
Oh, yes, and that's a good idea. Well, so something to think about. Thank you to everyone who's been with us, and we're now going to close this event and hope to have you both again in future and keep news of the pop-ups, Queer Armenian libraries here and there and everywhere.
Yes.
Thank you to the Institute
Thank you for
making this. Thank you to the Institute. This is really lovely. Thank you for your commitment.
Thank you very much.